Hey listeners, you know we've got a Patreon, right? Where supporters get early access to all our podcasts, bonus episodes, discounts on merch, and access to the Feminist Frequency Discord? Well, now you do. Get all this fun stuff while supporting our show at patreon.com/femfreak. That's FEMFREQ.
She did a huge block letter piece over a DKNY, like billboard, and caused a lot of controversy. And she just said to me, but why can DKNY own that space, but I can't?
Come on.
This is where I live.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by a woman whose street name is Pillow Soft and who lives by the code of the sheets, not the streets. Ebony Adams.
What's up, y'all? When you start seeing Pillow Soft written around the streets of LA, you're going to be like, A, I knew her when. B, I'm so glad she's finally coming into herself. 3, like, get this money a MacArthur Genius Grant because she deserves to be celebrated.
Yes, that's what's going to happen. I can't wait till, you are like an old therapist and you're ethereal.
Me too.
You're like ethereal, black
like art
drapey.
teacher.
Yeah, and you're going to have
fashion.
the big chain, not chain, but the big
it's gonna be
beaded
huge,
necklaces.
like beads. Yes, you know.
And then your name is going to be Pillow. You're going to make your clients call you Pillow Soft. That's going to be your therapy name.
No, my clients are going to call me Dr. Adams, but
yes,
the clients that I love will, be given a peek into my history, and they'll be like, okay, this helps me connect with you more.
I would go riding with Ray, Wayne, Stay High 149, Lionel 168, and sometimes the cops would come, and because I was a girl, I would sit on a platform sometimes, and they would look to see if I was one of the guys, and they said, oh, that's a girl, and they would run, continue chasing them. So I said, oh, if I put on a miniskirt, they really won't look at me. And I wore a miniskirt and sneakers. So I would stand there proudly showing my miniskirt, and they never thought to look down at my sneakers to see the paint all over them. They just saw the miniskirts, and they just took off after the guys.
We've got a very special episode of Feminist Frequency Radio for you today because we're delving into a subject that's not something we typically tackle on the podcast. We're going to be talking visual art, global feminisms, resistance, anti-capitalism, and more through a focus on graffiti. And to do so, we've got a pioneering and interdisciplinary scholar and activist in the field to join us, JESS Pabón. Hi, Jess.
Hi, Anita.
I'm going to read your bio at you. It's going to be really cool. All right. Dr. Pabón is an associate professor of women's, gender, and sexuality studies at SUNY New Paltz. Her teaching and research areas are vast and varied and include performance studies and theories, Black and Latina OX performance, and visual cultural studies with a specialization in hip-hop studies, women of color feminisms, and LGBT and queer studies. So excited to have you on.
Me too.
Okay. Dang, you went through the whole thing. All that is better when you're just reading it.
No, but
we reading it out loud.
We want to give you your flowers, but also, and yeah, we can problematize this, but we want people to know that you're legitimate. You got your bona fides, right?
True.
You're not new to this. Other people might be new to this. You're not new to this. So.
It's true. I appreciate that. Thank you for my flowers, my literal flowers I have in my background here.
Beautiful.
And just for this conversation, it's really fun.
Yeah. So before we get started, I just want to let our listeners know that this is a very visual episode. And we recognize that visuals are not a thing that podcasts do very well. So we are recording this. And if you are a Patreon person, if you back us on Patreon, you'll have access to the video. And we will link the slide deck that we're going to be looking at in the show notes. So you can check that out as you're listening. All right. Enough of that preamble. I'm so excited to have you on. I know I already said that. It's been so long. I feel like so you and I met at the TED Women in 2012.
Yes.
Where it was we all were what's the word I'm looking for? we didn't know what we were doing. We were all like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just like, holy shit, I can't believe we're here. It was probably one of the scariest things I had done professionally at that point. And I remember we all sat in like a hotel room and read our talks to each other over and over and over again.
100% we did that.
Yeah. And
just crying.
Almost. I remember not being able to
through.
So the way that they did it was no, you couldn't see the next slide. You couldn't have any notes. You had to memorize the whole thing. And so I never went through my talk once without fucking up, like before I got on stage. And I remember sitting on the side of the stage having a meltdown, like almost in tears before I went out. I was so nervous. I don't think I've ever been that nervous for anything in my life before. And we'd all
they told us like these are all the people who are going to be in the front row, right? Like that was part of it for me, right? There were all these like feminist icons who were going to be staring at me, and I was like, what is happening? And I remember that we also like meditated a little bit right before. I don't know if you remember that. We were like up,
I don't remember any of that.
We were like up on the side. Yeah. Like up before we were called down. And I just remember we were all freaking out. And I was like, we just need to breathe. And we did. And we got through it. And it was awesome. And I totally had like an out of body experience while I was on stage. Because I remember getting off and being like, what just happened? Totally. Was I there?
Okay. I don't remember any of the audience. I remember it was being live streamed globally. And 2012 was the year that the harassment started for me. It was like very fresh, just like months later. And I just remember being like, oh my God, I'm going to get attacked for this. If I fuck up, it's going to be the end of the world. Like that was what was happening to me. And so I remember for the first half of my talk, I felt like I was about to burst into tears the whole time I was on stage. And when I go back and look at it, I'm like, nobody could tell. I was fine.
No.
You looked great.
Like, you did fine.
But,
anyways, you and I don't think have really seen each other since 2012.
Not in real person life. No.
Which, but I was
our anniversary. It's like 10 years this year, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is 10 years. It's our anniversary. That's right.
Not quite yet, but in December.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting there. Anyways, I, bless social media to some degree because I feel like I followed your life for the last 10 years just on Instagram or whatever. And
vice versa.
I'm so grateful that you've come on to talk about this.
It's so good. And I get to like kind of freak out my students because I'm like, yeah, I know Anita. And they're like, what?
That did happen on Twitter recently.
It's like, that's I told you I'm kind of fancy.
I'm like super cool. Come on.
Moving on.
All right. So this topic is super interesting. Why don't we let you talk a little bit about like, what is performance studies? How did you get into this? You wrote a fucking book about it. Please share with us.
I did write a fucking book about it. Oh my God, what is performance studies? Performance studies is like if theater and anthropology had a baby. That's how I describe it to my students, right? So we're using a lot of the tools that we get through theater studies in terms of looking at gesture and how we carry our bodies through the world and how our bodies make meaning, right? In particular contexts. And then that transfers into the anthropology part, right? Where you're, anthropology and sociology, right? So we're looking at people. I'm a performance of everyday life performance studies scholar. So I tend to focus more on performance of identity structures. So gender, race, class, sexuality, that kind of stuff. And sometimes I'll write about like a performance that is theater, but that I always am like, I'm an imposter. Ha ha ha. I don't write about theater, but I'm going to write about it anyway because it's important. And, because I didn't grow up going to the theater, or museums I went to graduate school surrounded by people who did, right? They had a lifetime of the arts, let's say, right? Like as part of their belt. And that's why, for me, when I got into performance studies, I really was more focused on the performance of everyday life and then discovered that hip hop studies was like a field, a little one, an emerging one, right? But one that existed, and that there was something called hip hop theater. And then I was like, oh, maybe I could fit in this way. And, really sort of made my own path in performance studies that sort of, I cannot sit here and nor do I have any interest talking about like Shakespeare, right? That's just like not my jam at all. So thinking about the kind of art I was exposed to growing up, and that's where the graffiti comes in, right? The sort of urban expression, if you will. I always grew up around them. I was never a graffiti writer myself because my handwriting is trash, absolute trash. But it grew, the book was this like long project of a gajillion years that started as a master's project. I was in a class with an artist named Harmony Hammond. It was a lesbian art in America class. And, you have to do paper at the end of the class. And so I was like, where are lesbians like missing from the story in my life? And I was like, graffiti writers. Interesting. I don't know any lesbian graffiti writers. This is not the case anymore. So that was 2002, so 20 years ago, right? And for lots of reasons that I talk about and write about in the book, but basically, like, I was asking them to come out twice as women and as lesbians in a culture that is really dominated by cisgender heterosexual men. So that project didn't work out. And so I had to just sort of like broaden it out. Anybody who identifies as a girl or woman, like, let's do this. And over the years, through like a kind of, I would have to get the trust, right? I mean, a lot of these writers are doing illegal graffiti. Most of them, that's what I focused on. And so it took a lot of those years were just building relationships, that I wasn't like an undercover cop, that I wasn't going to go extract something from their subculture and not give anything back, right? Like these very understandable ways that they would sort of protect the community. And of course, you would think that like credentials would help, right? Like, I'm a master's student, I'm a PhD student, but no. And in fact, it was how I grew up and just the person that I am that allowed me to, I wouldn't say join the subculture, obviously, but witness it in a way that was like beneficial, mutually beneficial for everyone, and fun. We became friends. I became friends with a lot of these girls, and remain friends with them. So that's sort of how I entered. That's how I got to, this project with the book. It's been out now for like 3.5 years. So I'm also like a little rusty and talking about it. So when you were like, let's focus on some artists, I was like, ooh, new research, new people, because things are really different now than they were when I was doing my work.
I have a really basic question, because just to set the stage before we start talking about some of this stuff. But when I became a little more politically radicalized, I don't know where this came from, but it was drilled into me to not call it graffiti, because that was the language of like criminalization, but to call it street art.
Street art.
And then people were like, well, if it's just tagging, it's not art, right? But if it's like saying something, it is, right? And et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Like all these like really false divisions that feel a little bit classist, a little bit, questionable in a lot of ways. So what are your thoughts around like naming and language? Like your book is called Graffiti Girls, right? I mean, which is a great alliteration.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Oh my gosh, so many things to say. So a lot of times, and I don't know if you're, taking to the streets and having people say, college street art, not graffiti, was like if people knew who you were, right? If they knew that you identified, right, as a woman. But a lot of the time, street art and graffiti are gendered just like from the beginning, right? So graffiti is gendered for men, right? It's a masculine expression that is seen as something that like women can't have, right? Produce and perform. And then street art is seen as more feminine. It's like less aggressive. It's not criminalized. Often it has a very specific political purpose or a community building purpose. It's more acceptable in a lot of ways, right? It's not seen as like destroying public property in the same way. Often it can, well, I'm not going to get into, there are so many different specifics when it comes to like genres. But the other thing that happened was when we think about the way that like just street art as a genre and graffiti is, they're not just gendered, they're also racialized, right? So graffiti is very much imagined as something that brown and black boys do, right? Street art is not positioned similarly, right? In a like kind of racial imagination. Graffiti is also tied to gang membership in a way that street art is not, right? Also about class and race and criminality and gender. So I always really like, for the purpose of my book, I said, do you identify as a graffiti writer? Yes? Okay, we will include you here. Instead of using these, there's like kind of like rules about what counts as street art and what counts as graffiti that a lot of times have these underlying gendered, race, classed sort of standards, right? Or like expectations that make it so that it's literally, you can't be a graffiti writer because of the aesthetic you use or the materials that you use or something like that. And I didn't really realize that until I went to South America and I was hanging out with some girls in Chile. And, you know, they were painting some really cute stuff. It was, I mean, I was making fun of myself on Instagram this morning because I've curated, you know, all I ever did was critique how all the graffiti books about women were pink. And then mine came out mostly pink too, which was like, what's happening? And so, you know, it's got this like purple, pink, very femme vibe. But, you know, those that when they're Spanish speaking, I call them grafiteras. Those grafiteras, right, graffiti writers, they embraced femininity while they performed masculinity. And so like that was one of the things that I really had to take a lot of time to like parse out in my book about, right? Because they would say things like, I feel like I can't be a woman when I'm writing graffiti. And I'd be like, okay, well, like, let's think about that. Or they will say, I am all woman at this wall. And, you know, show up in like a cute little flower dress with flowers in your hair and, you know, almost always sensible shoes because we are climbing. But I have definitely also seen high heels at the wall. So it's not a thing that, you know, people don't do. But just to be brave enough to say this cute character that I've painted on a wall is graffiti, I had to like think about that and write about that, because in a lot of places that wouldn't be considered graffiti. It's not letters and it's too cute. It's not aggressive enough. It's not, you know, sometimes there's a photorealism thing that people want to see, or your letters aren't, you know, deconstructed enough. It's too easily readable. It's easy to do because you're a girl. So of course your graffiti would be like a cute character, right? So yeah, I mean, I can talk about these decisions for forever because they're really complex.
I find this super fascinating.
Yeah.
I also did performance studies in undergrad. But I guess I'm wondering too, just to clarify, like you say graffiti writer, not graffiti artist. And you just made a mention of like letters as a very important piece of, or like a boundary around what, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Yep. So I use both. Writers call themselves writers. They're writing their name on a wall. Those of us who look at the work and want to appreciate it, right? Like there's this book, how graffiti art became like an urban crisis. I think that's what the title, this dude, Joe Austin. And it's just in this book, he makes this argument like graffiti art could have been this really important, you know, artistic movement had the visual arts world embraced it rather than like just sort of stood by while it was criminalized, right? And so, we tend to see the art in the thing. No one graffiti practitioner will have the same opinion on that. They'll say like, of course I'm an artist. No, I don't want to be an artist, because they're not trying to be accepted by like the gallery world or right, the graffiti art or the art history canon in general. And some of them are, right? Some of them use graffiti as like a jumping off point. They learn all sorts of like social skills in addition to, right, aesthetic skills in terms of like making a letter, creating a font, that kind of stuff. And then they go do something else. They go, put their work on clothing, right? Like at some kind of retail. MRS, who's a Puerto Rican Italian writer out of the Bronx, who I've been following, thank God for Instagram. I keep in touch with everybody because of social media, but I get to watch their work grow. When I first interviewed her, 2011, maybe, very new, just sort of getting into it. She writes MRS and figured like Mrs. would be a good enough signal to everybody, right? That she was a woman painting graffiti, and yet still heard like, oh, did you see MRS got up the other day? He's so dope. So she started adding like a bow to it, right? To further gender. So to further make her gender difference visible. Well, now she's turning her tags into like touchable rugs. Wow. And I want one. I was like, oh, she's like, they're going in a show. I'm like, can I have one after you're done showing it? Please tell me. Because I want to touch that. That would not be considered graffiti, right? It's like, it's a textile, but it's a tag textile. So, and ever the one to look for where people are breaking the rules. I'm into it, man. I'm like, yes, make graffiti rugs. I want them all over the place. So artists are writers, writers are artists. It's sort of like how you want to present it, who your audience is, right? And then like how you're trying to like make that visible. Because if you say a writer, it could be any kind of writer. So if it's not in context, so yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Can I ask, so one of the things we're going to be sharing along with the episode is this great slide presentation that you put together. And the very first thing that you share is a clip of an interview with a writer called Charmin65, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that she mentions in regards to, a comment you were making about these artists in South America saying, oh, I either proudly display, a type of femininity, and then, but as I do this traditionally masculine thing, or I don't consider myself to be performing my femininity, in this moment. But so Charmin65 talks about how because graffiti is so resolutely male identified, when she would be out tagging with this crew of boys, the cops would chase her, but they would assume, or they would be chasing the graffiti artist, and they would she was invisible in that moment because she was a girl, right? And she's like, I'm going to take advantage of this. And in fact, I'm going to, underline it by wearing a mini skirt, so that there's even more reason for them not to suspect. And they don't even look at my tennis shoes, my sensible shoes, right? That are covered in paint, because they just assume a woman, can't be doing this. But so she also says something in that clip about, we wanted people to know we were there. It was important, for us, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was important for us to sort of speak aloud in a way and mark that we were there. And that's one of the things that's so compelling for me about graffiti is that it is a way for communities to insist upon their existence in spaces that are trying to push them out or trying to, delete their access or just deny their existence, right? It is a way to very forcefully reclaim space. So I'm fascinated by that, but I'm also fascinated by other places that graffiti exists that I would consider like perhaps inaccessible spaces. So it's not, the side of a subway car, that tons of people see, or it's not the side of a building, but it's like in a tunnel somewhere, right? And you're like, who is this for? You know, is it just for you, or is it for other writers who know to seek out these spaces? None of this links together. I'm just telling you about, like, I could not be more fascinated by your work. And every time you talk about something, it makes me, you know, I have 20 more questions to come up with. Like you mentioned, deconstructed letters and the idea that if something is too easy to read, it's not real graffiti, right? So like the question of audience and who these things are for, the fact that you have to be trained into a certain kind of literacy, you know, and that's a marker of being a member of the in group, right? And so if the expectation is that that's something that men do and that women or femme-identified people, right, something that's more accessible, that's you know, part and parcel of the way that we understand masculinity and femininity, right? That women are about sort of, you know, being open and creating space for more access, and men, you know, traditionally like the deniers of space. I don't know. It's just whatever. Y'all, please buy Jess's book, but also email her, follow her on social media, because the woman is a genius. Like, I want to hear you talk for 40 hours.
Thank you. I need this. You know, in this like or not even post-pandemic.
We in the middle of this.
Where are we? Where are we? In the before times.
Right?
Yeah. All the masks, mandates, and all the things are just I'm in New York and everything's just disappearing. And I'm like, what does this mean? But I was saying I need this because you know, the pandemic put me in a place of like, I mean, at the beginning I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, because so many writers were going out because New York was dead, right?
Interesting.
And so like there was nobody anywhere. And so writers were like, oh my God, right? It was like, there was more train graffiti in those first, like, I don't know, 8-9 months of the pandemic than we've seen since, right? Like since the beginning. And it was because, right, everything was like shut down, nobody was around, all of that stuff. But as a thinker, as a person, I was just like, I'm gonna make masks. So I was really confident in my sewing skills and kind of confident in my homeschooling, and kind of forgot that I was a person who has like an analytical brain, because I was just trying to survive. So it's nice to like exercise this. In terms of audience, I think it's a great question, because again, there is no like singular answer, right? So if you're in a tunnel, okay, the pure, right, a purist sort of perspective on hip hop graffiti is that it is for your peers, period, right? And that comes from a place, again, of, you know, these are mostly Afro-diasporic youth, immigrants, you know, financially disenfranchised. Their neighborhoods are being literally burnt down, right? The Bronx is burning, that whole jam. There's, you know, we don't have the sort of social programs to sort of, I don't want to say keep them busy, right? But all those sort of social support structures, right, that we need to have some kind of quality of life to, right, succeed, quote unquote, in this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. None of that was there, right? They were very invisible. They were very disenfranchised. And they said, you know what? We're going to talk to each other because nobody else is listening to us. Right. And why can, you know, I was talking to Donia many, many years ago. She's also a writer from New York. And she did a huge DONA block letter piece over a DKNY giant like billboard, you know, and it was like this whole thing caused a lot of controversy. Of course. And she just said to me, but why can DKNY own that space, but I can't, right? Like, this is where I live. So, you know, that's where the sort of anti-capitalist part comes from. And so, you know, it's both for a kind of middle finger to the man, and a kind of, look, I'm important, right? It is a cultural capital thing in the subculture. Like, people know who I am, right? I have a name for myself. I'm not gonna die unnamed, unknown, unremarkable because they knew they were remarkable, right? Everybody was telling them they had nothing, and they said, we have culture, we have aesthetics, we have, right, these tools that, come to us from just coming together, right, as Afro-diasporic subjects. Not that they were all Afro-diasporic, right? And then you also said something about trained literacy, and I literally just finished writing a piece about one of the crews that I put in the slide deck, Few and Far. They break all the rules about what a graffiti crew is supposed to look like, because they're not only graffiti writers. They do social justice work, which is not a rule, but it's not a standard, right? Usually for graffiti crews, there are skateboarders, there are street artists. And when I say street artists, I mean, when they go paint a wall together as a crew, Few and Far, some of them have spray paint and some of them have paintbrushes. That's against the rules, right? I've also seen people do like physical collage. Like when I was in Brazil, they were like, this one writer, she was gluing like shells onto a character that on the wall. And I was like, what do we call that? Like, how do I how do I understand this? Right. It's like a multimedia graffiti piece. Right. But so the thing about trained literacy, I have no idea where I was going with that train of thought, but I want to get back to this is, crews. That's how you learn. So the deconstructed letter, the form that is sort of the holy grail of graffiti letters, is called wild style. And it's hard to read. And that's the point of it, because it's only for graffiti writers. Wild style is the literal, F you to the man, because only graffiti writers are going to stare at it or immediately see the letters. I'm just like staring at it. I studied this stuff for 20 years or something, and I'm like, I don't know what it says. No idea. And that's okay. But if the usual makeup of a graffiti crew in a predominantly, right, again, cis male subculture is that it's only it's men and maybe a token woman, right, who has her own experiences that we could talk about for days. We don't have access to those sort of mentor-mentee relationships where they're like, no, your M should not look like that. How about if you kick that leg up this way, and it's kind of, when I teach this to my undergrads, I talk to them about, way back in the day when women were allowed to be nudes, right, for the figure drawing classes, but not the painters, right? And so you could be the nude model in the room, but you couldn't paint. And I would say, not having access to that room or the apprenticeship structure, which was seen as inappropriate for women. Because you're going to go into a man's studio unchaperoned, right? To do what? Because you're not supposed to become a professional artist, right? So there are parallels that carry, unfortunately, through centuries. And we see the same kind of dynamics, albeit, right, like modernized, if you will, for like our contemporary situation happening to these girls in terms of, learning how to do wild style letters. I do think that that's changing too, though, because we have the internet a lot more now than we did, right? Like the internet is everything. You can go online. You can learn how to beatbox online. I met a girl who learned how to beatbox online because she didn't feel comfortable joining the all-male ciphers, right? And similarly, you can learn how to write these letters now online because the information circulates outside of the subcultural cliques.
You can get a Groupon for a graffiti class. Like literally, and I know this because I looked for it and I was tempted to get it. And then I was like, okay, but who is this dude, this random dude offering like a $30 graffiti class? Because it could be just, Chad from down at Santa Monica Pier. Like, I don't know who this dude is, right? And there is something about like, questions of authenticity, which I am completely, not the person to gauge authenticity, and whether that's even an appropriate metric. But come on, I mean, there's something going on there, right? When the art form has been, it's not even commodification at that point. It's something. It's been flattened in a way. That almost like strips it of the kind of sense that it used to have.
Yeah. No, it's, I was talking to Claw Money the other day and she said something like, yeah, it was on the trains, it was on the wall, and now it's on clothing and we're done. And I said, oh, okay. Like, she's like, it's over. And she, she's a very sarcastic, but also very to the point person. I've been in touch with her since the beginning. She's one of those people who we've grown to be good friends. She actually is delving into the world of NFTs for her graffiti right now. And I'm like, I don't understand. And she's like, they're so stupid. And I'm like, I think they are so stupid. I don't, but to stay competitive, right? So she's one of those who, right, put in her dues as, right, an illegal, right, graffiti writer. And now, she was the first woman to design a NASCAR. And it was like for breast cancer awareness. So there were claws all over a NASCAR. Very cool. She, she's well on her way with her claw paw. And so, it's sort of part of the progression or trajectory. Don't ask me what they are or what they do, because I don't know anything about NFTs. Okay.
We're not going there.
Giant
excellent.
Do you want to show us some work?
Sure. Yes. Okay. I think maybe not the videos because
yeah, we can link those, or they'll be in the deck so people can watch them. I do recommend watching. We're gonna play you probably heard a little bit of this clip from the intro, but what Ebony was talking about, she's delightful to listen to.
I love how we're getting
really
like a free undergraduate seminar today, y'all.
Yeah,
love
and we just go through a few of them.
Okay, so this is just like a smattering of her work. It's just to sort of
this is Charmin 65.
Describe what we're looking at. This is Charmin 65. I pulled a bunch of images from the internet, and I just want to emphasize again, when I started this work, I was like mailing handwritten letters to people and receiving like pictures, like printed out pictures. And now I can go online, type in Charmin 65 and find all sorts of stuff. And so Charmin she made it into my book in terms of just like a name reference, but I wasn't able to like talk to her. I wasn't in contact with her. If I was doing my book now, this is where we would have begun.
Right.
And so we have like, there's an image on the top of her with, all of her stuff is legible. She does a lot of like bubbly letters, or I would say like funky letters. So on the bottom, the pink one, the Charmin with the 65 in the N and the little crown on top, totally readable, like, but you can tell that it was done at like a painting jam or something because the background is all the same color. So the question of authenticity, I learned a trick from Miss 17. She said, well, if it's a picture online, look at the background. What is the thing painted on? Did they have time to paint like a solid, right, canvas, basically? There's also a screen grab of, I think I found this on a random Tumblr of one of her original Charmin 65 tags on an old New York train. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Underneath that is the crew that she was the only girl to like be let in. United Graffiti Artists, UGA. You can see it's a multiracial, it's a black and white photo, but you can tell, right? Like it's a multiracial group, and she's at the top smiling away, doing her thing. So I just wanted to give like, these are different pieces over time. And what I think happened with Charmin is that, having gone from sort of my story doesn't matter. And I see this a lot. And my book starts with Abby 106, who has a very similar story. Also a Black woman, from New York. I believe Abby is from Queens. And, she says, I never really thought about what I did as a teenager as mattering. It was just what we did. It was just like, and then all of a sudden here are all these like graffiti histories and graffiti's being pulled into the history of hip hop and people are paying attention. And then I thought she said, it wasn't until you asked me about my participation that I realized that like my story was part of the story. And so Charmin predates Abby 106, and is in a lot of ways, right, the beginning of that particular story. And we often don't hear her story because even though she was one of the first, she didn't write for as long. And what I think happened was as the sort of, the world of social media opened up connections, she came back. That's how I found her. In 2017, I was finishing up my book and I was like, what? She has an Instagram page? Like I didn't even know what to do with it. I had to write a separate little note, like the world has changed. It's so much easier to find them now. And
can I ask you a quick question about like the ephemerality of some of this, right? Yeah. Because the expectation is that if you tag certain places, they're going to be painted over, they're going to be cleaned, whatever. Yep. So that this stuff is not going to last. And the internet, online spaces are a way to both like curate but also preserve some of these images beyond what will exist out in the natural world. But there's also that sense that, it's the internet. So the site link could go down and then it's gone forever. So the images that we see that, we're looking at on screen now, sort of Charmin 65's work throughout the years, like how many of these things are still there? Like, can you still go find this?
Oh gosh.
This stuff? Is she still doing this?
Yeah.
Like,
so she's still painting.
She's still writing?
She's still writing. I want to say, look, no writer ever stops tagging. Like you got to catch a tag in a bathroom stall every once in a while. Like it's once you've sort of create, because it is a commitment to be a graffiti writer and to like do it properly. You have to do it often. It becomes part of your like everyday process. But I think as they get older, the illegal stuff fades out for really practical reasons, right? And so now you'll see her more often painting like I want to say there's another clip in here of Rocky 184 and Charmin 65 talking to each other after an event they did at the Bronx Museum. So, right. So there's also this sort of, do I want to call it a feminist awakening? I don't know. I don't know if we're there yet, but right. This sort of, I can never tell if it's a good thing or a bad thing when museums are like, graffiti, come.
Right.
Right. Because it's such a push and pull relationship. But so you have an event that's about like women in graffiti. That's where you'll see Charmin 65. Right. And, because we're in New York and a lot of them are still in New York. So it's sort of a re-emergence of these early writers and an appreciation for them. And so the ephemerality part. Yeah. I have a whole chapter on it in my book because I got really jacked up thinking that this crew in Brazil was still active. And it turned out they were not active at all and hadn't been for years. And I was writing about them like they were getting up in Rio every day. And, and then I realized, that's just because on the internet, they have a lot of photos. Right.
Right.
And so, but the argument that I make is that by documenting themselves online, right? So I think at that time it was Flickr mostly. Instagram has definitely taken over, right? But it used to be Flickr. And I feel like there was another one before that I can't remember exactly what it was called. Where, these things, they didn't have info, like you couldn't click and get more info about the image. There was no caption. The Flickr page wasn't tied to like an actual person. There was no timestamp on the image. So it's just this graffiti written by women floating through internet space, right? And not ever really being sort of stuck to a time and place. And And so I had to just like think about like why does that matter for graffiti girls? And you know, like most minoritized people, no matter what you're doing, your work is erased. Your presence is marginalized. You are not the main story. You're not the main image or narrative. So what social media gives us, and that, you know, just various Instagram, the name of the other spot just came to mind and I lost it again.
Smug Mug. That was one I used back in the day.
No, I don't think
Smug Mug. That's awesome.
Smug Mug. Yeah, that was the one I used before Flickr.
And there was, if it comes to it doesn't really matter. Anyway, you know, they're putting themselves online. They're creating their own record. And so there was a moment in like the early 2010s, I want to say, where all of a sudden you could find graffiti girl websites. It was like, what? The Stick Up Girls had their own website. That was new, right? It was, you know, I think it's hard for people who, so I was born in 79. I'm like, I forget what they call my generation. I'm like a Zennial. I'm a Zennial, right? I'm in this like micro generation. But the sort of the way that my project parallels the way that social media and just internet usage in general just catapulted is really interesting because it really changed things for girls. It really, really did. They were able to claim their own space on the internet when they weren't given spaces in like publications about graffiti. And so like, I think, you know, the ephemerality of, you know, it's on the wall 1 minute and it's gone, that sort of expectation and acceptance translated into the virtual world, right? Mm-hmm. It was like, yeah, it's going to be there and it's not. Somebody's going to screen grab it. We have no idea where that's going to go. Right. And, you know, I make the argument that there's a whole bunch of stuff over the past 20 years that probably only exists on my hard drive at this point. Right. Because a screen grabbed it, or I did the internet archive way back machine and screen grabbed those. Right. Because just like the wall, websites go up and down because you have to maintain them and it costs money to have them. And right. So, so there's a lot to be said about, you know, the kind of pros and cons of social media or graffiti's sort of virtual life.
Yeah. Do you want to show us a couple more? Yeah, we're yeah, it's okay. We're probably need to speed through a little bit of this, but I'm excited to see what else is in here.
Okay. So this is, there's no sound because this is Rocky's like boyfriend, husband, boo, whoever is talking about something unrelated. So I cut the sound out, but this is just Rocky 184 tagging on what looks like a old like tank or something. Yeah. An old ship. She's in Antigua. And I just thought, oh, that's fun to just like see her in her like,
yeah, I love the casualness of like, I'm just smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
Writing some letters.
Writing some letters. And she, I think that is supposed to say Charmin 65.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, you know, you can see how she gets up for her girl, right? So she's getting her name up, but she doesn't get. But I also love it because she's like with her like gray hair, right? Yeah. There's like so much about this the image, right? Of and I believe she's Puerto Rican. Every once in a while, she'll send me like a huepa or you know a palante on Instagram. So I just feel like you know she is my people. Mm-hmm. And just seeing her, you know, on vacation in her bathing suit, just like doing the damn thing. And she's got to be in her, I hate math, but she's got to be what, in her 60s?
This is, if I had a child, this is the kind of grandmother I would eventually turn into.
I'm saying,
you know, okay, and so I don't have a child, but I could be somebody's auntie. Yeah. And this is what I'm trying to live.
Is it common to tag other people's names as respect?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. It's like, and that goes back to the like crew structure and the community, right? So like the number often notes like where you live, right? That's where the 165, Charmin lived on 165th Street, right? But it's a way to just like bring in your community no matter where you go. It's a very hip hop aesthetic, right? That's one of the differences between... hip hop.
It reminds me of
and
those
street
groups
art.
who are like 702 or 112, right? You know, like repping the zip codes of where they're from.
Yeah.
That,
And I just want to shout out my very old t-shirt that your people cannot see, but it is a granny with a canny from Portugal. There was this, there was one of the oldest Portuguese graffiti crews. Basically, I guess just recruited all their grandmas or like grandmas in the area and taught them how to write graffiti. And they raised money for the program by selling this image of like the hunched over grandma spray painting. And I was like, give me all of the t-shirts of old ladies making graffiti because it makes me so happy.
Oh, that's amazing.
I love it so much. So this is just what we're looking at now is just another collage of different pieces that I found on the internet of Rocky 184's work. There's really old ones. You can tell because it's marked October 27th, 1971, right? So like, I have no idea where that is, who took it. Like there's no attribution. So like the way that like the Western world categorizes and archives things does not like function in a lot of ways when it comes to especially these early like graffiti writer images that circulate. But you can see she writes in a bunch of different styles, very colorful. I just wanted to give you an example of her work. And then the last video, which the listeners definitely watch this, the Getting Up video that was like produced by the energy drink Monster.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Monster does a lot of sponsoring of graffiti events, right? Like my first production thing was actually sponsored by Red Bull, right? They gave me a bunch of money and all I had to do is like be like, you guys want to drink some Red Bull? And they drank Red Bull while they painted, and it was a beautiful thing. Take corporate money and do something good with it. That's my lesson of the day. But so they got sponsored by Monster to do this. It was like a 9-year anniversary kind of, I think they thought, right, like the pandemic is kind of over. This was last January. And they got like 30 girls to go paint. I think they were in Virginia. Yeah. And the crew, Few and Far, which I mentioned earlier, in the caption to this video, it says like they're the largest graffiti girl crew in the world. And I just want to put a little asterisk there and say that we know of, because graffiti is anonymous. And so we can never really know, right? This is the argument I make about Banksy all the time, even though I haven't had to talk about him in 100,000 years. And then I think, yeah. So the last image is just from like a screen grab from their homepage. You can see they're a very large crew. They started in 2011. That's when I first contacted the founder, Mimi. She's from Northern California. She's indigenous. And she told me that she wasn't sure about participating in my project because they weren't a feminist crew. They just wanted to like give props to the ladies. And I was like, okay, let's just keep talking. And I hear what you're saying, but, and as she got to know me again, so there's another layer of like trust, like what kind of feminist are you? Right.
Right.
What are you like, what's your angle here? And I just had to show her over time. My angle is your angle. Like, you know.
And I think that, you know, you started this conversation talking about like building trust, which I think anyone doing this kind of research as an outsider, documentarians, all of that have to do. And like, I think people should be skeptical of folks who call themselves feminists, right? Like you do need to prove that you're not going to cause damage to the community. And, you know, like it speaks a lot to your integrity that you like spent as much time as you did. And I'm assuming, you know, like celebrated and showed them the way that they wanted to be shown, right? In a context, in an academic context.
Yeah. And that part wasn't easy, right? So, you know, one of the things that surprises people often about my book is that the foreword is written by Miss 17. And she basically says like, I don't agree with anything Jess says, but I respect her, and she put in the work, and here's the this, that, and the other thing, right? Because she still holds on to the her viewpoint, and this is something that Charmin and Rocky talk about in the videos that are in the slide deck. If you're a writer, you're a writer. It doesn't matter if you're Black. It doesn't matter if you're white. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter if you're a girl. And my intervention is like, I'm super great. I'm psyched that like, that's your perspective. I'm going to put it out there. I'm not going to change it. And I'm not going to try to change your mind. Here's mine. Right. And it differs. And that's okay. Right. I learned a lot about what I presumed about my feminism by interacting with so many girls from so many different places, like, the Netherlands, South Africa, Greece, Brazil, Chile, right? Like the United States, Canada, Mexico, Nicaragua, like so many, they all have a local and specific context for what feminism means for them. And I was, just in the early years, especially when I was doing, as my master's project, very much, I thought like, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm working class, like, I know what's going on. I'm cool. I'm hip. My feminism doesn't suck, like that kind of thing. And I'll be able to relate, right? Like one Latina to, some other kind of minoritized individual. And I learned very quickly that, I can't escape the way that imperialism, and, just kind of like a US centric feminism was part of how I came to feminism in the academy. Right. And so I had to like pull all those pieces apart. Of course, you think that, of course, you don't want to be associated with the kind of feminism that you to be extractive and harmful and, sort of, just I want to say harmful and violent, right? Like there are lots of quote unquote kinds of feminism that are just protecting the nation, protecting the state, protecting white supremacist, right? Capitalist heteropatriarchy. And that's what a lot of them thought initially, right? That's what I was bringing. And so it was actually good for me because I had to articulate, what is different about my feminism from the one that you expect? Because I'm writing a book about all girl graffiti writers. So they would be like, I don't think matriarchy is a good idea. And I'd be like, I agree with you, right? Like, that's right, or, I don't think women are better than men. I agree with you, right? Like gender binaries or
and also, I think that our conception, the mainstream conception of feminism as it does is transformed. And so I think in the last 10 years, it's really become more mainstream and more normalized. And and it wasn't as a dirty word like it was when we first started doing this work.
That's right.
And so there's like, I feel like you're talking about all the things that we all bumped up against as feminists, who were marginalized for, or that the concepts of feminisms was marginalized as something that was, extremist and ridiculous, and why do we need that anymore, and all that kind of stuff. And so interesting to see that, like, to hear you talk about being pushed up against that in like, which you have to build these relationships to do your work, right? You have to figure out how to navigate and dispel some of the myths around it in order to get these people to trust you, which I think is fascinating. I got to speak into the void and not have to worry about any of that shit, like you agree with me or don't agree with me. I don't know. Can't do anything about that.
I mean, I had somebody, when I was in Rio, she was talking to me about I interviewed some women who were involved in an organization, Hedi Nami, which is a very well-known organization at this point, founded by Panmila Castro, who writes Anarquía Boladoña. But anyway, so I was interviewing one of the members of NAMI, and she was saying, when I talked to the teenagers, one of them told me, but I can't be a feminist. I want to wear my bra. And there was this like idea,
Wow.
right? And I was like, and she's like, and she was really concerned because, she has large breasts and she needs a bra for support for her back and this other thing. And I was like, I mean, will never be like team bra, but if you need one, wear it. That has nothing to do with your politics, like that's, to me, that is a little driplet of a mainstream story that wasn't even based in fact about bra burning, right?
Mm-hmm,
and feminism, totally. or like, I like to shave. I can't be a feminist. And I just be like, we have so much work to do, right? And like redefining, right? I mean, not for nothing, Anita, like I still hear some of that from my undergrads, right? It's 2022. I teach 17-year-olds and they,
I'm so sorry.
Right? Like this is what I thought feminism was.
Yeah.
And like, thank you for disabusing me of that notion, And I feel like that's,
and then
like,
they go back to their dorms and fucking light them up.
They
in those
do.
late night sessions where you're getting high with your friends and you're like, I just discovered what postmodernism is. I'm about to blow your mind.
I feel called out. All right, y'all. We'll be right back with some freakouts. We all need a little emotional support from time to time, but don't always have the resources or access to the support that understands us. I know it would have been life-changing if during the height of the online abuse against me to have anyone else who understood what I was going through. That's why me and my team built the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. We provide free, confidential, emotional support for people who make and play games. Because we are people who make and play games too, and we get it. You can learn more by texting info to 23368 from anywhere in the US, or visit gameshotline.org. That's info to 23368 or gameshotline.org. What's your freak out? Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Ebony, I feel like you have some feelings about some things.
I do. This is on the upsetting or freak out, like infuriating, upsetting and infuriating side. So just to give you a little bit of context, I used to be, so I have my PhD in English, fully expected that I was going to be a professor somewhere, teaching, if not literature, then being in somebody's American Studies department, maybe a women's studies department, if I could, strong arm my way into that, doing cultural studies work, doing gender studies work, right?
Yeah.
It became apparent to me pretty quickly as I approached the end of my time in graduate school that the academy was not a place that I wanted to be, nor was there a place for me in the academy, which does not mean that I, preach to my friends, people that I respect, that they should not be in the academy, but I just knew that it was not a place for me because of the particular type of politicking that goes on and the kind of tokenization that goes on. The ways that the academy and these institutions of higher learning use the work of, scholars of color, queer scholars, disabled scholars to boost their enrollment, to make their brochures look great. But when it comes time to actually pay people, to give them the kind of work-life balance they need, to, in fact, legitimize their presence on campus with things like tenure, that I was never, going to be able to ride the pony in the circus in the way that I should, right? So I left the academy. That's the context. I still follow a ton of scholars on Twitter, right? Because I'm interested in how other people navigate the academy. So this past week, stumbled upon a conversation that's been blowing up academy Twitter from this social psychologist called Michael Krauss. I don't think he was someone that I, followed before, but now I do. And he was very open and honest, sharing that he got the news that he was denied tenure this week. And although Michael Krauss's work is not work that I knew well, he is phenomenally respected in his field. One of the metrics that is used to determine whether you are a legitimate, candidate for tenure is the amount of your number of citations, right? So your standing in the field is indicated by how many people use your work and cite your work. He's got just a ridiculous number of citations to his name. He is also someone who does work on inequities that represent a clear and present danger to the status quo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, you're not surprised that he was denied tenure, but you are, because it's further proof that no matter where they tell us the goalposts are, they will always move them. And you will always find out after the game that it didn't matter if you made a goal anyway, because you were never actually playing the game that you thought you were playing. So we're going to link these Twitter threads that I'm talking about in this conversation. But after Michael Krause posted his story of being denied tenure and the conversations that he had with his department head and various other people at his institution, I believe he's at Yale. Then another person named Cesar Hidalgo talked about how he was denied tenure at MIT. And the conversations that he had about it, just so illuminating, so fascinating, and so horrific. Because he talks about this conversation with the dean, right? Who says, I think it was maybe the president, who says, ultimately, if you're a mediocre researcher, but your department wants to keep you, they'll find a way to keep you.
Yep.
If you're a sterling, superb researcher, but they don't like you, they will find a way to get you out. And when we see the number of scholars who are denied tenure in these institutions, how often is it scholars of color? How often is it scholars who are attacking root power structures, who are saying, there's fucked up stuff happening in our society and on this campus, that we need to call out? Mm-hmm. It's just, it's horrifying. It's not surprising, but it is surprising in a way that it still happens. This idea that, meritocracy is, something that has any kind of currency in colleges and universities is a grand lie. And so, I'm going to share these Twitter threads, but I would love to hear, Jess, what sort of conversations you've been having with your colleagues about this, because you are precisely the kind of scholar who comes up against this kind of thing, right? Yeah. You talked about how you're not interested in performance studies. You're not doing Shakespeare, right? That's a safe topic. You're talking about Black and brown peoples, more than that, but you're focusing on Black and brown peoples. You're talking about hip hop studies. You're talking about queer folks. You're talking about outsider art. Yeah. They'll use you. They'll put your photo up on the website, but when it comes down to it, how much do they respect what you do?
Right. Well, I just want to acknowledge that, I'm a Puerto Rican in a white body. So actually putting my face on a website doesn't do what they want it to do, because I read like a white woman. Right. And that has definitely influenced my trajectory in the academy. And I always make a point to note that, right? There are doors that were opened for me, I'm sure. Right. Because I sort of looked the part. Then when I get there, they're like, oh my God, what did we do? Right. It's like, too late. I'm already at the table. Okay. So I just really quickly. So, right. Tenure is the thing. If there are listeners who don't know, right, what tenure is. Tenure is the thing that you work your ass off for years doing extraordinary amounts of service and research and teaching so that you can't get fired, essentially. Right. It makes it so that you can be in your position forever. I just actually, I think 6 months ago, talked to a reporter about how that can be a trap for people like me, right? So I did get tenure. I was too vocal of a presence on campus. I think if they had denied me tenure, it would have been this whole, insanity of pushback and resistance and so that's my another little nugget, be as visible as possible, but build your allies so that if they come for you, you're not alone. But better yet, they won't even come for you because you're just the squeaky wheel. But what that has done is made it so that, now that I have tenure, I'm just tired, right? I got to this point and I'm just it's a position of privilege because I got it. But now I'm just, academia has beat me down. They just the vampire sucking because I'm trying to change an institution that at its roots is rotten. So it's, it's this really difficult work. In terms of the tenure denial thing, one of the cases, the Michael Krause, obviously, anybody who's denied tenure, I'm just Jesus, because the emotional, part of getting a PhD and then getting to the point where you have tenure is a lot of like brainwashing of your only value is in the academy.
Right.
And if you don't get tenure, you know, it's not like I think at some places you can still work there, but it's basically like we've fired you and now we'll maybe hire you as an adjunct, maybe. Right. So your career at that point, nobody tells you what to do after you've been denied tenure because you're not supposed to be denied tenure. But if you look at the statistics on race, gender, and like who has what level, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, for Latinas, for example, at the associate level in the US nationwide, we're like 0.02% of associate professors, right? So if you're at 0.02 at associate, then to get to full, right, which is like the top tier, right, before you start going into all these other academic, you know, presidents, fellow, you know, whatever. It's like less than zero. You know, it's just, it's there because of these things. The work that we do is seen as not important, right? Or the work that we do is like the case with Nicole Hannah Jones, right? Is that her name, right? Like the board of trustees were like, nope, no, you were not. It was hiring, right? I can't remember if for her it was hiring or tenure. I'm mixing her case up with Lorgia Garcia Peña, who was denied tenure at Harvard. And right, like very well-known, respected, amazing genius, right? Denied tenure at Harvard because her work is in like Dominican studies, right? It's critical race studies, and she didn't get tenure. And it's unfortunately not surprising, right? Like when you're in the system and you're paying attention to who gets tenure, but also who's the dean, who's in the administrative positions, who's getting the accolades. It's very clear to see. They'll let a token in every once in a while, but even that, there's a price to that tokenization, right? And if you don't play the game right, and if you don't, if you're not a proper token, right, that can be taken away from you and you'll be sort of substituted out, right? And then at the same time, we have tenure being taken away. So it's like the one thing that you're given, like if you make it to tenure, in some states, they're doing away with the tenure system entirely, which I don't know that our field is quite ready to like deal with, but it's because, you know, we're in late stage capitalism. It's cheaper to have adjuncts, tenured professors who, you know, you never retire, you're tenured. So you're 89 years old collecting that check, right? Not that we're paid a lot, but at an Ivy, if you're a full professor, you're collecting, right?
Right.
Not the case for me, but there are definitely instances where you've worked somewhere for a really long time, you have tenure, you're making a lot of money. Why would you retire? Right. So it's like from the institution's bottom line perspective also, right? So it's like a racialized, gendered, capitalist, right? Like there those factors that we have to talk about when we talk about, right, like who's getting denied tenure, why, what happens, and I love Twitter for that. This is, I guess today is like Jess says that she loves All Social Media Day, because I was talking about Instagram earlier, and now I'm like, thank God for Twitter, because we're sharing our stories.
Right.
You know, like the more transparent we are, like I tweet my salary constantly. I work at a state university. I now make 71,000. I started at 55 in 2014. You know, where I live is not cheap. It's ridiculous what I get paid, right? I put it out constantly because I think people should know, this is how many classes I'm teaching. This is what I'm getting paid for it. This is how many students are in my classes. Right. This is all of the like unpaid work that I do. Right. I noticed in the Michael Krauss situation, a lot of the responses were from students being like, what? Because this dude was not only publishing, but he was, you know, doing the damn thing every day with his students. And I just can't, I can believe it and I can't believe it at the same time, right? It's like such a the academy.
Fucked up.
So glad I didn't do that. I feel like I immediately was like, no, fuck this shit.
Oh yeah, Anita and I are just like, we escaped. We escaped.
I mean, I
my
escaped
God.
before you. I only got a master's degree.
Yeah,
You
and
did the
meanwhile,
whole
I was
thing.
like, oh yeah, give me some more student loans that I ain't gonna pay back.
I'm saying, I mean, I'm not going to front. I've definitely been trying to escape, right? Like the whole reason I got my PhD was to then be able to like be in a better position for like feminist organizations, right? Like have more knowledge. Also, right? Like I'm a doctor. That's fun, right? I'm the first one in my family to have all these degrees. So like there's that. But at the end of the day, you know, I often find myself making super basic arguments. Like if we're going to talk about white supremacy, we might not have like an all white, all male panel, for example. That might be like something to consider, right? And having
about that.
and having like, right? Like pushback on that. Like, do I want to work somewhere where I have to like fight that fight? Like, you know, and but if I don't, then who's going to like raise these babies, right? Like I'm out here trying to raise 120 feminist babies every semester, right? Put them out into the world.
Yeah.
Woo, Godspeed.
Yeah.
You better than me.
All right.
Talk about a freak out.
It's a good freak out. So if you want to submit your own freak out, you can do that at feministfrequency.com.
I'm laughing
freak
because
out.
can you tell Anita what has been happening to the freak outs that people have been submitting?
I'm about to. Okay, well, so you can submit it at feministfrequency.com/freakout, FREQOUT. You may notice that we don't get a ton of freakouts, but you'll notice that there hasn't been any because our contact form just imploded and I didn't notice. So if you have sent one in the last few months, I did not get it. Please send it again. Problem has been fixed. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're freaking out about. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Jess, you're amazing. So glad you did this. We should have you back on to talk about other things.
Yay!
Where do people find you? How do they buy your book? How do they support you? What does that look like?
Great. So my website is just my name, jessicapabon.com, but I'm super fun on Twitter. So you should follow me there. I think I'm fun on Twitter, justjess_PhD. And you should buy my book at your local bookstore. And if they don't have it, you should request it. Otherwise, bookshop.com. That's where I get all my books. But it's published by NYU Press. And I appreciate all your support. And this is super fun. And I definitely want to come back and talk about other things.
Are you still running your fundraiser for Puerto Rico?
I'm not. Good memory, Ebony. Nope, that was like a post Maria thing, but I'm working on a project on Puerto Rican feminisms right now, but it's still like under wraps. So, but I just realized the other day that the beginning of this project was that like fundraiser thing,
right? And
was like, what? I've been doing this work for years and I didn't even know. So now I'm going to try to like make it into something. So stay tuned.
Right on, right on.
Nice. All right. Our show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Next week, sorry, I did this backwards. Next week, we are talking about the piano. Jane Campion's The Piano. It will be 4 weeks of female directors with some awesome guests. We've already recorded some of these episodes, so I can tell you that they're really fucking good so far. Not that all their episodes aren't really good, but they are.
Some of them shit is marginal.
We definitely phone it in sometimes. So these ones are coming out really good. So stay tuned for that. All right, we'll see you all in the bonus. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.